Welcome, everybody. College football coast to coast every single Monday at noon right here on this YouTube channel with myself, Pigskin Pete, and of course, the world famous Mark Rodgers. How you doing, Mark?
Except maybe in parts of North Korea, world famous. So we're working on that.
Yes.
Trying to get college football big over there. But besides that, I think you're right on point.
Yeah. We need they need to get internet before you can become famous over there. I don't know if there's any college football fans in North Korea. What would you think? I would think that they don't even know that sport exists, probably.
Yeah, I think they have a few other issues on their hand.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, for those that do have the internet, we had some interesting things happen over the weekend. There's lots of different storylines. We were just talking before we came on air. Not a lot of close, interesting games. Obviously, the Penn State game, probably the most exciting game of the week. And luckily, I watched every snap of that game. A lot of these other games I didn't watch. But some big storylines. Is Michigan for real this year? Is this the year that they can beat Ohio State and win the Big Ten? We'll get into that because it certainly looked like they could. At least challenge Ohio State based off of one game, of course. LSU got a new quarterback. Is he the next heir apparent to Joe Burrow? I don't know. We'll find out about that. And what was the other one I was looking at here? Any other storylines you can think of?
Well, the Wisconsin quarterback situation is in peril right now because so their starting quarterback, Jack Cohn, who led them to the Rose Bowl last year, he was already out. So he's pretty much out for the season. I think it's pretty much determined he was hurt that badly. He's out for the season. So you bring in Graham Mertz, who was their prize recruit a couple of years ago, Elite 11 guy. And then all he does is go out against Illinois on Friday night in his first start, go 20 for 21. And it was a sharp 20 for 21. Now, it was Illinois and it was Wisconsin's offensive line. So there wasn't a time, and I watched pretty much every snap of his throws at least. It was one of those where 45-7 game, it's on in the background. But I checked out his throws, and it was one of those deals, Pigskin, where it wasn't like he wasn't sitting in the pocket all day and picking out his receiver. So he didn't have much resistance back there, but still, man, he's the real deal. He can spin it. So 20 for 21, but then he tests positive for COVID yesterday. The news broke. So they're waiting a second test to confirm that to see what's going to happen there. And then also the Big Ten has such stringent COVID guidelines, more so than the other four conferences, that they're talking about if you hit a certain limit in regards to the number of players who either test positive or are targeted with the contact tracing, then you're talking about a 21-day quarantine, and you could wreck somebody's season. So that's the secondary part of that, is how much is that going to impact the rest of the team. But in terms of just the quarterback position, Wisconsin might be down to their third string quarterback. Remember the name, Chase Wolf.
Chase Wolf.
Chase Wolf.
That's an easy name to remember.
Yeah, it's kind of a cool name. Wisconsin starting quarterback. I'm Chase Wolf. Yeah.
That is an interesting development there with the Wisconsin. It's not just the quarterback, like you said, but the contact tracing. Oh man, this really could be bad for them. Now they play Nebraska this week. They open that as a 10-point favorite. I would have to believe if they're down to the third string quarterback, that line has to change and quickly.
And I'm thinking that line's 10 because of the quarterback situation to start. Now it may get even worse.
Right.
Because Wisconsin's better than 10 points, better than Nebraska, I think. Although the Huskers played okay, better than the final score would indicate, I think, against Ohio State. The other issue, Pigskin, in regards to Nebraska defensively, they had, and I hate this targeting rule, I think the actual discussion that the officials and the review team have about the targeting is one issue, but then once it's determined somebody is targeted, just the penalty is I just think it's inconsistent and ridiculous.
Yes.
So you got two top Nebraska defenders, maybe their two best defensive players, both play in the secondary, will be out for the first half of that game. Cam Taylor-Britt and Deontay Williams.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Nebraska is, although their defense has improved, they're not very deep, especially at that position. So having those two guys out is a big deal.
Absolutely, it's a big deal. Even though Wisconsin, you think, they're not going to throw the ball all over
Right.
the place, but it's the passing game. It's the secondary. It hurts the entire defense. Yep.
Yeah. Speaking of Nebraska and Ohio State, I don't know how much I learned from this game because I'm of the belief still that Ohio State is another level, not just in the Big Ten, but at another level. They're up there with the Clemsons, the Alabamas. It's those three and everybody else right now. As a matter of fact, if you're trying to forecast a fourth spot for the playoffs right now, there's about 10 teams you could put in that slot probably, and some of them hadn't even played yet. Right? They could be in the Pac-12. But Ohio State I didn't learn anything about Ohio State. If I have one criticism, and it's hard to find a weak spot on Ohio State's team, it's sort of like trying to find a weak spot on Clemson's team. And I think that there's a lot of parallels between Ohio State and Clemson this year as far as the way they look. They got pushed around a little bit on the defensive line in the first half of that game. Now, offensively, I don't know that you could say there's a better offense in the country. I mean, you might be able to say that Alabama and Clemson offensively are on Ohio State's level, but I don't think you can say they're better than Ohio State. Justin Fields looks like we all thought he would look. Obviously, replacing J.K. Dobbins was a futile mission, but their running game, I think, will get better. It'll be a running back by committee sort of a year for them, but they can score with anybody. So the only thing I could say was the defensive line for Ohio State looked a little bit inexperienced, a lot like Clemson. I mean, very talented, but inexperienced.
Yeah, there's never any question about the talent when we talk about these three teams, and you can even add Georgia. They've got other issues. But in regards to talent, so the guys that replace the guys that move on to the NFL in terms of the recruiting rankings, the star rankings, they're just as high. But you can't replace that productivity and you can't replace that proven commodity. So you lose the number one corner in the NFL draft, top 3 pick. You lose the number 1 defensive end in the NFL draft, the number 2 pick. And you replace them with guys that were ranked just as high coming out of high school, but they haven't done it on the field. And we did see that the first 2 or 3, 4 drives for Nebraska where they were in a 14-14 game, and Adrian Martinez was pretty much picking his running lane and chewing up yardage because he got sacked a number of times and still had 85 yards rushing. So he was well over 100 yards rushing downfield. And that's where Ohio State had issues a couple of years ago, and they shored him up last year, and they were airtight on defense last year. But they showed some chinks early in the game. But again, first game of the season, first few drives, and then after that, they didn't give up anything. Another place where they didn't really measure up to what you would expect is they're supposed to have one of the best offensive lines in the country. They had issues moving Nebraska off the ball and off the line of scrimmage to move the ball on the ground. Justin Fields was the guy that was moving the ball on the ground more so than the running backs. And that's where I'm going to separate Ohio State in a negative way from Clemson and Alabama. Travis Etienne, Najee Harris, Ohio State, blank. I don't see that player.
Yeah. And that's been a key emphasis for the Ohio State offense for many years now.
Yeah. Carlos Hyde, J.K. Dobbins, Ezekiel Elliott. Yes.
Yeah. Luckily, though, Ohio State has such an elite passing game that I think it can supplement a little bit for that. I mean, there is no replacement for having a elite running attack to complement an elite air attack, but at least it is something. I just don't know there's many defenses in the country, if any, that can slow down Justin Fields in the passing game. I just don't see it.
He had like a perfect game. I know not statistically, but the ball was dropped. Like every ball that he threw 21 passes. Yeah. There was one ball to the back of the end zone where the wide receiver, and I won't try to pronounce his name because I forget it. It's like Smith Majigba. I always get his name screwed up, even though I've known of the guy since he was a high school player. But anyway, he made a great catch in the back of the end zone, but it wasn't like it was a poorly thrown ball. Every ball he threw, there was even, it was kind of funny because somebody ran in what was kind of an out and they fell down, but the ball still came right at what had been their gut, but it was going to hit them right in the helmet and they caught it sitting on their rear end.
Yes.
He
Slim
was on
Shady
the
Change,
bus.
thank you, sir, for the donation, and thank everybody that donates. Mark and I could not do this show without people supporting it, so we really do appreciate it. I wish I could thank you more often than we do. He says King going 21 of 30 for 300 yards, and Miami only putting up 19 points is concerning. I would agree.
I do too.
That is concerning. First of all, the entire game was concerning, quite frankly. When you came out with the win, that's all that really matters. But it was against let's face it, a bad team, a disappointing team here. And, there's Miami's still right there in the thick of things. They're still right there in the race, Mark, for the ACC. The who wants to come get their butt kicked by Clemson contest is what I'm calling it. But I don't know. They didn't do anything to impress me. Really defensively, they look okay, but they're inconsistent defensively too. This is the thing about Miami is you could see flashes of greatness from Derek King and the offense, but then they'll lay an egg. And the same thing is happening with the defense. They're just not consistent.
That's a catchy little name you've got for the ACC championship game. They should use that. They probably get more viewers than all the people that tune to another championship game because the Big Ten's going to be a good game. Oh, Clemson's playing who this year? Oh, Pitt, Virginia. It's not going to be a game. They come up with your name and maybe they might boost the TV ratings. I like that.
You could sell some T-shirts too with the who wants to get their butt kicked by Clemson contest.
But in terms of Miami, I had the same question. So what I really need to do is we, of course, have our Find Miami channel. And I need to rewatch this game or really watch the game for the first time, truth be known, because Michigan, Minnesota had my attention on Saturday night. I had Miami, Virginia kind of DVR on the laptop, and I was in and out, not really picking up the vibe of the game. But at some point in the game, late in the game, to Slim Shady's point, I saw De'Ara King's numbers, and I thought, why do they have 12 points? Why is it 12-7 right now, and it's in the fourth quarter? They've got 12 points, and he's like got 300 yards passing. What's going on here? Are they turning the ball over? No, he's not throwing picks. And then they wind up with a 19-14 win. And I know that it might have been a little bit more comfortable than that, but still, you got a 5-point lead. One play can change. You can lose the game on one play against Virginia at home. It shouldn't be like that. So I'm thinking, it wasn't adding up for me either in regards to I'm looking at the stat sheet, the box score. I see all this offensive numbers and no turnovers, and I'm thinking, why can't they score more than 19 points?
Heard of a lot of excuses. It was bad weather. It was raining hard. Okay. It was raining hard for Virginia's team too. They were playing in the same weather conditions as far as I know.
So are we going to say Virginia would have scored 45 points if they would have had a nice field to play on?
Right. Thank you, Wilkie. He says Miami not competing in the ACC ever. Alarming. Well, forever is a long time.
I get that comment, Pigskin, about Michigan, Ohio State. People will say, do you think Michigan's ever going to beat Ohio State? And I guarantee that if we're still playing football, Michigan will have beaten Ohio State at some point. I don't know when that's going to be. Might take another 8 years or 18 years. I don't know, but they will beat Ohio State at some point.
Yes. Some people believe that this could be the year, Mark. Look at this guy's name here. Every once in a while, I have to highlight somebody's name. His name is Clemson is your daddy. He obviously watches a lot of Pigskin Pete. I have not said it so far this year, Mark. So I'm going to reserve that for probably the inevitable game where I think Clemson and Ohio State are at some point, they're on a collision course, unless you get a Clemson Ohio State versus Alabama matchup in the playoff or something. But of course, we're a long way away from that. So I'm reserving my Clemson is your daddy rhetoric until the appropriate time. But thank you, sir, for being in here.
I know you haven't said it around me. So
no. Well, I do. Every once in a while, I'll get an Ohio State troll or something in my comment section. And if they push me to the limit, then I will bust out the big guns for that. But
I've got our guy DeAndre hitting me up enough times a week with 4-0 and 31-0.
Oh, is he still doing it? He's still with that, huh? Anyway, speaking of speaking of Michigan, rather, could this be their year? I'm going to say I watched that entire game too, or the first 3.5 quarters. Whatever. Joe Milton to me was extremely impressive because I'm hearing a lot about him, obviously from Michigan fans throughout the entire offseason. I didn't know anything about him other than that he was a big kid, highly recruited. We've heard this before, though, with other players at Michigan under Jim Harbaugh.
Yep.
I will say, for his first, first of all, it's hard to judge a lot of these first games being played in October. Not a lot of chemistry with the team. Some people think it's an advantage that they've had a longer time to practice. So I think it's a huge disadvantage, especially for the skill position players like quarterbacks. They're not on the same level, a page with the receivers quite yet. All of that just not working in cohesion. I think he showed flashes of greatness. I think he's clearly the best quarterback that I've seen under Harbaugh, even after only one game. Now, the jury's still out on him. But what'd you feel about the way he played?
Well, I think that you hit on something in regards to evaluating the first game, because we're always trying to figure out how good's the opponent. So we think we've got a beat on the opponent. Then suddenly, of course, Michigan goes out there. They drub Minnesota by 3 to 4 scores. And then I'm sure you heard the same thing that I heard, is that if you're pro Michigan, you're saying, we just killed a good team. We're great. We're ready to go. And then other people are saying, Minnesota's trash. They suck. Michigan didn't prove anything. Well, we got to wait and see how the season plays out. Before the season started, I was pretty sure Clemson, Ohio State, and Alabama were great. And even at their worst, they're like the 5th to 10th best teams in the country, that kind of range. That's like their floor. But man, there's so much variation with these other teams. Like Michigan could be a playoff team. They could be like the 20th best team in the country. That's a good indication what they gave us on Saturday night, certainly, because they took a team that we expect to be a top 20 or 25 team in the country, and they mauled them. They were the much better team. They got ahead by 2 or 3 scores fairly early in the game, and they were the much better team. Minnesota scored his first touchdown on a block punt. Michigan didn't even play well on special teams. They had 2 missed field goals. They had a block punt for a touchdown. They still beat them by 24 points, 25 points. But in terms of Milton, I think that's impressive, even if Minnesota turns out to be a very marginal team, a 5-5 type team. He went out there his first start, didn't make mistakes, got the ball to the right players, ran around all over the place when it was appropriate, when it was the right thing to do. Hit, I believe, 15 of 22. Didn't see him make any stupid decisions. Didn't see him make any horrible throws. Everything was pretty well on point. He had commanded the offense. I think a big key to this game that may be overlooked is that if you look at Michigan's running game last year, they couldn't average more than 3 yards per carry, slightly more than 3 yards per carry against anybody that was good. Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan State, Ohio State held them all around 3 yards per carry or less. They ran for 8.2 yards against Minnesota.
Somebody brings up a great point in the chat here. First of all, I think you still have to give credit to Minnesota. I don't think you can just. I don't buy into the Minnesota's a terrible team. That's why Michigan looks so good. I don't believe that. I'm just telling you, first of all, Minnesota came back as one of the most experienced teams in the Big Ten. So it's not like these guys forgot how to play football in the offseason.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of first game jitters, not having film on the new quarterback, all that could play into it. But does Minnesota have the worst kicker in the history of college football?
That's their backup kicker.
I don't care.
But we can make note of that, though. That is not their starting kicker. I don't know what happened to him. So that was another issue. Yeah.
That was alarming. I'm telling you, I don't know if I could kick my leg even above my waistline if I tried without pulling a hamstring, but I'm pretty sure I could kick the ball farther than that guy.
So you're talking about the punter too.
Yeah, the punter.
The punter. Yeah, the punter's awful. I don't know what their situation is with the punter, but that was actually their backup field goal kicker, and he made a field goal. It didn't look great, but he made a field goal. But yeah, the punter, yeah, to the point where there was speculation that when they went for it and ran a fake punt on 4th and whatever it was a fairly lengthy 4th down at their own 28-yard line, that maybe PJ Fleck's like, this guy's going to kick it 15 yards anyway. I might as well fake it.
I'm telling you, I have a video of myself kicking punting a football in my backyard, and every punt in my video is 20 or twice as far as this punter for Minnesota. But
there's a job for you.
Yeah, seriously though, I was impressed. Again, it's hard to tell exactly what's going on with Michigan's offense and how dynamic they can be, but I can just tell a difference. It just looks more electric. I don't even know how to really to describe what I'm trying to say here. It just looks more effortless. It doesn't look like they're grinding for every first down. They're grinding for every 2 and 3 yards, like what we're used to seeing in Jim Harbaugh's offense. So it looks like they're able to move the ball pretty efficiently so far.
Yeah, I was on a Michigan podcast last week, and I made the comment that going into last season, Michigan, for being that kind of program, was alarmingly devoid of running backs. They had nothing. The second game of the season, they had to take a true freshman, Zach Charbonnet, and run him 33 times, and they had nobody else to carry the football. They were that thin at running back. They had defections. They had a suspension for a season, Chris Evans. Then this year, they bring back Chris Evans, and Zach Charbonnet's had a full season with 11 touchdowns after last year. And Hassan Haskins, they converted him from a linebacker last year to a running back. Now he's got a full season, and they've got, I can't think of the kid's name. It's like Blake Corcoran, something like that, is their prized freshman. He got like 3 or 4 carries in that game against Minnesota. So now they've got like this stacked backfield, like 4 guys that they're comfortable with running the football. And it showed. They ran, again, 8+ yards per carry.
Yeah, and it showed. Thank you for the welcome, Danny D-Rock Mahaffey says, "What's up, Pete and Mark?" Dang, Pete, Clemson looked terrible Saturday. I said, I don't. Maybe this is a Clemson fan overreaction. I do believe that's probably the worst game that I've seen Trevor Lawrence play. I mean, listen, Clemson the game was never in doubt. I mean, I was never worried about the game being, losing the game or anything, but they did end up winning by 25 points or 26, whatever, 47-21.
I love Dabo's reaction after the game.
Well,
did I show up at the right news conference?
So here's the thing. I feel like he gets himself in trouble with this because he's defending the team and saying, we won by almost 4 touchdowns and people are acting like we lost the game. He's defending his team. I understand that. But he's also the one that runs around constantly saying that we don't play to our opponent. We play to the standard of Clemson. We always play to the Clemson standard. Well, if you can't, both things can't be true because clearly they didn't play to Clemson standard. Yes, they won the game handily over a very bad Syracuse team. I mean, to me, it's really much about nothing. It's not as if Trevor Lawrence and the rest of the team forgot how to play football all of a sudden. Also, this is not an excuse because Clemson is a very deep team, and so that's one of the benefits that they have. But they were missing their 3 best defensive players. They didn't even start the game. Best defensive lineman, best linebacker, and best corner all didn't even start. But that's not an excuse when you're playing against a team like Syracuse. So at the end of the day, I don't think it really matters. This is the product of having a young team, I believe. You come off of a 73-7 victory against Georgia Tech. You become disinterested. You have Syracuse at home next week. You just walk out there, go through the motions. Syracuse has to punch you in the mouth a couple times to wake you up, which is eventually what happened. But other than that, I wouldn't be. I don't think anybody's really worried about Clemson at this point.
I basically saw one play of that game. This is the reason why. I saw some highlights, but basically tuned in for one play because for some reason the TV schedule's been kind of out of whack in my estimation. And the noon games have almost been the best games of the day. Like there's been the last couple of weeks, like 5-6 noon games that I was like, why aren't these getting spread out throughout the day? These are like the better games. And so obviously Clemson and Syracuse was completely off my radar. Yeah. But once I saw it go to 27-21, and I think I saw the highlight of the 80-yard play Syracuse had, and it was 27-21, I thought, and whatever games I was watching, I was losing interest in, boom, I go right to the Clemson-Syracuse game. First play I see is strip sack, scoop and score, Clemson touchdown. And I'm like, okay, that was not that I expected to tune in and see some monumental upset, but I knew it wasn't a situation like we saw with Chase Bryce a couple years ago where it was serious. It was dire. Like, this is like 3 minutes left in the game. We got to convert a 4th and 6 or whatever. This is still 2 minutes left in the third quarter, but it's still kind of interesting. Like, oh, Syracuse is hanging with them. I'm going to check this out. Okay, boom, scoop and score. It's 2 scores now. Forget it.
The funny thing to me is that, because of course everybody out there, this is an Ohio State person. Everybody just waits for anything bad to happen to Clemson, and then they massively overreact to it. And of course, the whole Trevor Lawrence is out of the Heisman race. He threw a pick 6. He threw 2 interceptions in the game. One of them was a pick six. His first pick six in his career at Clemson, obviously.
Yeah.
And I point out, does anybody remember a guy named Deshaun Watson? And first of all, I could care less about the Heisman. I really could. I'd rather win a championship. But does anybody remember the year that Deshaun Watson came in second place to Lamar Jackson in the Heisman voting? He had 16 interceptions that year. 16. That is obviously, for anybody who could do simple math, more than an average of more than one a game for the entire season. So believe me, Trevor Lawrence will be just fine.
And I remember that stat well because I certainly defended Deshaun Watson, and I actually said he should have won the Heisman. I actually posted a video explaining why I believed he was still the best player in the country and should have won the Heisman.
Yeah. So anyway, for all the Clemson people out there, nothing to see here. Moving right along. Let's see here. Some of the games, North Carolina State just absolutely got drubbed by North Carolina. I don't really know how much stock we put in that. Was North Carolina State a little bit overrated? Quite possibly. We already talked about Ohio State, Nebraska. Rutgers, listen here, Mark. How long is it going to take before Michigan State's relevant in the Big Ten again? Because they have problems that cannot be fixed overnight.
Yeah, so they were already in decline with Mark D'Antonio.
Yes.
So they had already gone from a top 5 to 10 team in the nation for 5 straight years to 7-6 the last couple of years. So then on top of that, they just play in a division that's always going to beat them down. They don't play in a great recruiting state for high school football, so they got to go elsewhere. D'Antonio had already lifted, top 35, 40 recruiting classes to top 5 to 10 teams in the nation. So you can only live on that for so long. And he did a great job for most of his tenure. But when they were looking for a coach and Luke Fickell turned them down, and I guess other people turned them down, that Mel Tucker was like a 5th choice. And they even overpaid him. Like the money he's making, and I don't remember the figures, but when I saw them at the time and how many coaches they had taken him over in regards to the salary list was pretty astonishing. Like they really were desperate to say, we're going to throw you like $5 million a year and come and be our coach at Michigan State. But in that division against Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, and the recruiting hauls that they get, like they're all automatically 4th. And I think it's going to be a difficult rebuild, but I didn't anticipate this against Rutgers. But that shows you how much a head coach can change. And Greg Schiano's no all-time great, but he obviously won there before against lesser competition in the Big East. It's a different world this time. But still, that's how a really good coach can come in and at least clean up what they've got there to make them capable. And they're a different team. They had lost 21 straight games in the Big Ten. And most of those games, almost everyone was like laughable, like 55-7, like losing by an average of 40 and 50 points a game, like not even close.
That you're right. It shows you the difference that coaching makes. And again, you're also right about, Rutgers isn't going to all of a sudden turn into a Michigan or something like that. But clearly they have cleaned things up. I mean, I believe I picked Rutgers. I didn't actually bet it, but I picked it before the game. I said that I think they would win against the spread. I did not see them winning the game outright. I didn't think that would happen. So we'll see. We'll see exactly what Greg Schiano can do there. His problem is, first of all, he's at Rutgers. That's problem number one. Problem number two is he's in the East in the Big Ten, which is obviously the tougher of the two divisions. So he's got. I mean, I don't see a Big Ten championship in the future, but they could play the role of, if I'm going to compare Rutgers to maybe a team in the ACC, like a Pitt or a Boston College or something along those lines. Some of these teams who are going to always be middle of the road in their conference, but can ruin somebody's season. Can Rutgers become a team that could possibly ruin somebody's season in the Big Ten? I think that they can eventually.
Yep. They have high school talent there in that state too.
Always Irish is in here. What's up, buddy? And he says, Michigan's year, you guys should not drink hard liquor this early in the morning. I knew that title would get you in here, Always Irish. I don't know. I will tell you this much. I still believe there's a massive chasm, just to answer his comment here, massive chasm between Ohio State and everybody else in the Big Ten. But based on what I saw just after one game, this is the first time that I've seen Michigan's offense have a pulse. So that's a start. And obviously, they always usually typically have a top 5 or 10 defense in the country anyway. So I don't see that changing this year. So that's a step in the right direction anyway. All right. Moving right along here. Perfect timing. Notre Dame, with always Irish in here. Notre Dame against Pitt, a decisive victory, 45-3. Man, Pitt has lost 4 games in a row now. They have 0 offense. They might have the worst offense in the country. I can't think of one that's worse, actually. Can you?
I thought it was going to be Rutgers, but no, they tore up Michigan State. No, I can't think of a worse offense. You know what? The other candidate for worse offense last year would have been Northwestern, and they scored 43 points against Maryland and completely drubbed them. So, yes, worst offense in the country. No Kenny Pickett for a second straight game.
Yeah, the irony here is they played Notre Dame, which obviously Knute Rockne famously invented the forward pass, and ironically, Pittsburgh cannot complete a forward pass. 45-3. Obviously, after a disappointing win, if there's such thing as a disappointing win, the week before when Louisville came into Notre Dame and Notre Dame's offense looked completely inept, 12-7 victory against a bad Louisville team. So, you go on the road to Pitt against a really good defensive line. You put up 45 points. The problem with Pitt, there's lots of problems, but it's not the defensive line. But if you have 0 offense and your defense is constantly on the field, it's 3 and out after 3 and out after 3 and out. The defense is on the field for more than 3/4 of the game. Then even a good defense is going to break down. So anyway, Notre Dame went out there, looked good, won big. I don't know. Again, I don't know how much you take out of that. Obviously, it's a great win. It's a decisive win. That's what great teams do. But Pitt is next level terrible.
Well, I guess we can make some comparisons here. And I'm usually not totally into the transitive property unless we can compile more and more. Like if we have 5 of them together, then I think that makes sense when we can say Notre Dame and Miami played the same 5 opponents, and look, Notre Dame's killing them and Miami's scuffling by them. And we don't have that at this point. But we can start the links maybe, because Pitt just played Miami the week before on the road, and it was a competitive game until about 5 minutes left. They still had a chance to win, and they certainly were moving the ball to a certain extent, but against Notre Dame, they couldn't do anything, and they had the same personnel in, same quarterback. If anything, you would think that Kenny Pickett being removed from consideration for the starting job on the Friday, the day before the game, and throwing in Joey Yellen, bam, you're starting tomorrow against Miami, was a more difficult assignment than, oh, you're working with the first team all week. We get you all the reps. The game planning, it's all yours. You're the guy. You go in at home against Notre Dame. Okay. That should have been a better prepared situation for them, and they got crushed.
Yeah. They got crushed. The game that everybody's talking about, Mark, Penn State versus Indiana. Now, I watched every snap of this game. Did you watch the game?
Yeah, from about the second quarter on. Yeah.
Yeah.
The important stuff.
So lots of mistakes made on Penn State's side, right? They missed a couple of field goals. They missed one short field goal. They missed another one, I think was about 48 yards or whatever. All of that being said, the very end of the game, they marched down the field, take an 8-point lead with 1 minute and 47 seconds left in the game, I believe.
Yep.
Oh man, all you have to do is do not let Indiana get a touchdown in 1 minute 47 seconds. Indiana marches down the field in I think about a minute, maybe a little bit less than a minute, scores a touchdown, gets a 2-point conversion, ties it, then goes to overtime. Penn State immediately scores a touchdown, gets an extra point, goes up by 7. We all saw the controversial, if that's what you want to call it, play. So Indiana gets a touchdown, extra point to tie it again to go to double overtime, or they go for 2 for the win, which they do. I watched the play 100 times, Mark. This is one of those ones where whatever they call it on the field, I believe is what it has to stay.
Yep.
Right. And they call it a touchdown on the field, right? There's not enough there to overturn it. It's to me, it looked as if the knee was down, or was it the knee or the elbow? I think it was the knee. At the same exact time that the ball hit the pylon. If it happens simultaneously, I have to believe you call that a touchdown.
Yeah, there's so much to get into with this game, but that's obviously the moment that everybody's going to remember and may prove to be key to this season. Who knows? Because Penn State was supposed to be that team against Ohio State. So the thing I think we need to remember is that it's not just the pylon versus the sideline, it's also the plane. So based on my remembrance of seeing this probably like you 17 times or whatever it was, that I don't think there's any question that the ball hit the ground out of bounds before it kind of bounced up and hit the pylon. But I believe in kind of an odd way, all that ball needs to do is touch the front of the stripe, the white line, the plane of the goal line, just touch it theoretically, in air to break the plane and be a touchdown. And that's what's like so microscopically close that it's impossible to tell, that I'm okay with. I could tell, but it took about 10 times to be able to tell that the ball hit out of bounds before it hit the pylon. But then my next thought was the plane at the goal line. And that is so close. Like you, I would have been okay with either decision on the field being upheld in review, because there's no way you could overturn it either way. It was that close. It's that crazy.
Yeah. And regardless of what people think, listen, Penn State, they have problems.
Yes.
James Franklin this is not the first time he's mismanaged the clock in a close loss. I was listening to the radio this morning. Of course, I like to listen to Rick Neuheisel on the radio. And he really laid into James Franklin. He said, "Look, this is simple math. You cannot allow this to happen time after time after time. If you're really bad at managing the clock, if your mind is elsewhere with the X's and O's or whatever, personnel or whatever it is, and you're not managing the clock well, you literally just need to hire a guy that can give you advice in those situations on the fly. Because it's really shocking that a head coach as good as James Franklin. I mean, look." What he did at Vanderbilt and then coming to a program in shambles at Penn State, he's done a really great job there. But some of these games that he should be winning, you can't lose them based on a boneheaded clock decision like that.
Exactly. So it's just like any other job. There's like maybe 10 or 15 or 20 elements and components to this job. You can't be great at all of them. Know your strengths, know your weaknesses, know what you can tackle firsthand versus what you need to delegate. And I used to say the same thing about Les Miles, the exact same thing. I used to say, this guy botches 2 or 3 games a year. He needs to have a dude right next to him that is just a mastermind at game management, clock management, because he keeps botching it like Herm Edwards used to do in the NFL. It was awful. It was unbelievable. Like you could see it coming with 3 minutes left. Like, why is he doing that? Why did he just do that? And in this particular case, James Franklin's defense, I didn't see his news conference after the game, but I heard a tweet of the comment several times, so I believe it to be true, that he said after the game, well, we practiced that situation. So basically throwing his players under the bus to say, we practiced that situation, they should have known what to do. Well, there's a few issues with that. Number one is you can't practice that situation. How do you practice that situation? Because there's about 87 different variations of that situation. Do you have a minute 14 left? Do you have a minute 47 left? Do you have 2:19 left? Do you have 52 seconds? How many timeouts do they have? Do they have 0? Do they have 1? There's no way you can practice everyone to have it clocked in their head. Well, if we have a minute 15, but they only have 2 timeouts, then we can do this, but it's impossible. So you can, of course, you talk about it and say there is a game situation in which we actually don't want to score. And this is generally the type situation, but we will have to instruct you during the game on this is that situation. Do not score. And so the excuse doesn't hold water with me because there's too many variations to practice it. I just don't see that. Number 2, there's a change of possession. They just stopped Indiana on 4th down. They got the ball at the Indiana 14-yard line. This is ready-made for you've won the game. You're up by you're leading in the game. You got the ball at the other team's 14-yard line and they can't stop the clock. So and there's a change of possession. So he's got all of his offensive personnel right there. Doesn't he say to them and his staff, do not score, do not run the ball into the end zone? I guess the only two people that need to know it necessarily are the quarterback and the running back. They're going to hand the ball to the running back. Yeah. Do not score. Do not run the ball into the end zone. That's all they need to know.
Yeah. You blaming the player for that is a bad look. I mean, you could see when he was running, he hesitated like, I'm about to score. I shouldn't be scoring. But there should have been, again, there should have been no doubt.
Did you see Todd Gurley do the same thing yesterday?
Oh, two NFL players did the same thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I can't remember what the other one was. Yeah, Gurley did the same thing. He actually tried to fall down short, but just barely got in, barely scored. I mean, I understand these guys are trained to score, not to fall down before the goal line. But again, you have to. This is a coaching thing. You can't blame it on the player. I think you have, because the only way you can blame it on the player is if you literally tell him right before the play starts, hey, do not go in the end zone, and he still does it. Then you can blame the player. But if you don't tell him, then you can't blame the player.
The Todd Gurley run was funny because it reminded me of the Ahmad Bradshaw run for the Giants in the Super Bowl against the Patriots, because it's like when you're running almost as fast as you can, the time to make that decision's not at the half-yard line. You cannot stop yourself on a dime and keep yourself from breaking the plane.
Yeah. 4th and 16 Sports. Welcome, sir. He's a guy who has a great Clemson podcast and YouTube channel. Go check him out. He made a point earlier. Let me see if I can pull his comment back up. It was a very good point about the, here we go. I think this is it. They have pylon cams in the NFL. Don't know why they haven't brought them to collegiate football. I think that's an excellent point. I mean, I don't know how many games we see a year where the pylon cam can make a big difference in the call. I guess maybe a handful, but if you're on the losing end of that deal, then I think that, I mean, why wouldn't they have a pylon cam? They have everything else. They have cameras everywhere. Why wouldn't they put one on the pylon, Mark? Well, it makes sense, right?
Good suggestion. Yeah, I like that.
Anyway, so Penn State, I'm not going to fall into the camp of, look, the overreaction Monday as well. Well, Penn State, yeah, they should have won the game, but Indiana's a really good team. I mean, is Indiana a really good team, Mark? I mean, we don't know yet. It's only been one game. I'm not saying they're a bad team, but they're Penn State. If you just look at the recruiting over the past 5 years or whatever, there's not a comparison there.
No, there's not.
Be a contest.
When Sean Clifford's running around in the secondary, gaining 119 yards rushing, and Indiana linebackers and safeties are whiffing on him, I'm questioning the Indiana defense to a certain extent. And to underline your yardage statistic that you threw out at the top of the conversation, it was 488 to 211 was the yardage difference. Think about this. Indiana gained 25 yards in overtime. Obviously, they got the ball at the 25. They scored a touchdown. So there's 25 yards. They drove it 75 to tie the game. So that's 100 yards. So they had 111. They had 111 yards of total offense with about 90 seconds left in the game. And the disappointing thing about Penn State is that their defense played that well to hold Indiana. And I think Penix is a good quarterback. He's got a huge upside. I don't know that he's really good right now, but he's got a huge upside. They've got really good running backs, Samson James, Stevie Scott, receivers. Indiana's good offensively. For Penn State to hold them to just over 100 yards for the majority of the game, and then on the final drive, to your point, just needing to hold them out of the end zone, field goal's not going to do it, 75 yards. I looked at the drive chart after the game because I was thinking that happened fast. Mm-hmm. Indiana did not have to convert a third down. They didn't have to convert a second down. They went first down, touchdown. They went like 5 plays touchdown. Bam.
Yeah. Now, Penn State's got a rough game this week, obviously. What's the line on that one? I have it written down. 13, which is actually I think it's kind of low. 13 seems like anybody who's going to put some money on this should probably bet on Ohio State to cover that. I would think that they would. But anyway, we'll see. We'll see if they can turn things around there in Happy Valley. Speaking of blaming players, Mark, man, has Saban put his foot in his mouth on this one. Obviously, Alabama goes out, destroys Tennessee, stakes himself as the clear-cut best team in the SEC. Still, I don't think you're going to see that change in the near future this season. Jalen Waddle, probably the best wide receiver in the country. We can argue between a couple of guys, I guess. Most exciting player in the country, I would say, offensively, that's not a quarterback, is Jalen Waddle. Very first play of the game. Ball's kicked deep in the end zone. He decides to return it, rolls his ankle or breaks his ankle. I don't know what the exact injury is, but whatever it is bad. He's out for the season. Nick Saban, walking off of the sideline at halftime, is asked by the reporter, can you give us an update on Jalen Waddle's status? He goes on to say, well, he's out for the season. You shouldn't bring the punt back out that deep in the end zone. Of all the things that you can say in a time like that, and I don't think that Nick Saban meant it in a bad way or anything, but you have to be more cognizant of what you're saying there. It sounds as if you're blaming him for his own injury. Whether you're actually doing that or not, I don't think you meant it to be that way, but it's certainly a bad look. The only thing you say is he's out for the season. He's a great player. He's going to be sorely missed. That's it. Did you see what I'm talking about?
I didn't, but I don't think I need to see it. I heard that Saban said something about Waddle that was somewhat controversial. Yeah, you just said it right there, that we pay these head coaches at a high level and expect them to be, they can't be perfect. There might be something said at some point that's not perfect. But at the same time, Nick Saban's been doing this a long time. And you're right. Even if he's got it in his football head, he shouldn't have done this. He shouldn't have done this. He shouldn't have done that. Yeah, the kid's hurt. He's out for the season. Do not state anything in any way that's going to make it any worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, obviously that's a huge loss for the Tide. Again, you don't just lose the best receiver possibly in the country and say, oh, that's no big deal. But if any team can make up for it, it is Alabama, right? I mean, there's very few teams in the country, maybe a handful, 2 or 3, that can lose their top guy and still not fall off that much. As a matter of fact, they still have 3 or 4 NFL wide receivers on their roster. Mac Jones is playing out of his mind. This kid who I never even heard of before came in on the next drive after Waddle gets hurt. I guess he's his replacement and has like 4 catches in a row. I mean, he's out there looking like, he's not Jalen Waddle, but it's not that big of a drop off. I don't think that this hurts Alabama as much as people think that it's going to.
That wasn't John Mechie, was it?
No, Mechie, no. It was another guy.
So they already have 3 great receivers other than Waddle, and then I'll have to see who else they brought in, because
starts with a B, Bolin or something like that. I can't remember his name actually. Slade Bolden, they're saying.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, he does. He looks a lot like Julian Edelman, and I don't know if that's so much because he's white, but I think they have a similar style of play. Yeah. Intermittent Sports, he says, Mark, sir, editing that How Michigan Fans Watched video tonight, and we'll email it over. Pete, go blue. My thoughts. Milton looked good, but I'm cautious. Lots of safe throws to our athletes. Well, that's what you have to do. By the way, thank you for the donation. That's amazing. That's what you have to do with a young quarterback like Joe Milton, is give him some safe throws to give him some confidence. And quite frankly, it worked out. The safe throws worked, and it was a decisive victory. They didn't need to get crazy with Joe Milton in the first game. Just get him some reps and get him comfortable in the under the bright lights there. Slim Shady Canes, thank you, sir. They do have pylon cams in college, fellas. I guess just not every game. Well, that's weird.
Well, it's not the NFL. It's not. First of all, I'm sure there's a financial consideration to be made there. I also think that there's not the uniformity of where the NFL, we're going to put everything in exactly the same place and have the same resources and accommodations in every NFL stadium, versus college football. Depends on the conference, depends on the institution to a certain extent.
Yes. Speaking of quarterbacks, so somebody's here. We're getting a lot of quarterback talk here. I mean, Mac Jones playing out of his mind. Trevor Lawrence had his struggles this week. Obviously, Justin Fields, Joe Milton, all these great storylines as far as quarterback go. The biggest storyline is, has LSU found their heir apparent to Joe Burrow? And again, I don't think you saw any of the game, did you, Mark? I didn't see any of the South Carolina and LSU game, so I can't really comment on it other than what I'm hearing other people say. And it sounds like the way that he played was so impressive that it's his job now. They're not going back to what was the guy, the Brennan fella?
It's Brennan.
Yeah, so I don't think we're going to see Brennan again unless this guy gets injured or something. But what is he's a true freshman, right? This quarterback from LSU.
I believe so. So I did not see one play of that game. It's one of the many games I DVR on Saturday. It seems like I DVR like 18 games and have every intent in the world, but you can only watch so much football. So I didn't see him play to be able to judge. The box score looks great, of course. South Carolina's pretty good defensively. They've not given up a lot of points to really anybody this year, and they got torched by this LSU team. What was it, like 45 points they scored? 48, something in that range.
Mm-hmm.
So that's impressive. So if we just want to go by the numbers, again, I didn't see them play. And Brennan was putting up points.
Yeah, I thought he played bad.
Yeah, it was more defense.
Yeah.
Issue at LSU.
It's so hard to come in there and replace an all-world team like LSU had last year. And the quarterback play from Joe Burrow is just something you might see once every 30 years, maybe. And so, Brennan had a big shoes to fill, impossible shoes to fill, basically.
Yes, impossible.
But, we live in a world, especially the upper echelon teams in college football. Quarterbacks they are expendable. If you're not winning, a lot of the blame goes on the quarterback, whether it's warranted or not. And if you bring a guy in there who's a younger guy and he plays well, then it's hard to go back. It's hard to go backwards. So I think at this point we'll continue to see Finley until he either screws up royally or gets hurt.
So Pigskin, I get bothered when I don't know who somebody is. So when somebody says so-and-so plays left guard for Iowa, I'm like, okay, I got to look him up because I don't know who that is. And I want to know who everybody is. Slade Bolden's a redshirt sophomore out of the 2018 recruiting class out of Louisiana. He was the 14th rated all-purpose back in the country coming out of high school.
You're talking about the receiver for Alabama.
Yes.
So he was
6 for 94.
Okay, so in high school, though, you said back. Was he a running back in high school?
Yeah, they've got him listed as an all-purpose back in high school.
Wow. So obviously a great athlete. Yeah, a lot of times you see these quarterbacks who are just the best athlete on the team. They'll play quarterback or running back, and then when they get to college, they don't translate to that position as well, and they'll throw them in there at slot wide receiver or something. Of course, we saw that with Hunter Renfrow, the great walk-on at Clemson. He was an all-world. I mean, he's a very good high school quarterback. And he wasn't even good enough to get a scholarship there really anywhere, at least any major university. He had to walk on as a receiver at Clemson, and the rest is history. So it sounds like a similar situation with him. I saw a couple of plays with him, and he's good. I mean, he's quick. He's obviously runs really good routes, and his hands are really good. He reminds me a lot of Renfrow, actually, in a lot of ways. All right. Moving on to some of the big matchups this week. We've got about 10 minutes left, I think, here. Well, Mark, I think it's finally time to put the fork in Kentucky and say they're not winning the East this year.
Do we have to?
So, listen, you make a bold prediction like that, like the one that you made. If it doesn't come to fruition, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I mean, the chances that were going to happen weren't great to begin with. That's why it's a bold prediction, right?
It's the only one I made too, but that was it.
So anyway, they get to play against the Georgia team who had a bye week this last week after a soul-crushing loss to Alabama. The big question here is, because I don't know if Kentucky's is much of a story anymore. They have 3 losses, so they're sort of an afterthought. They still can play ruiner to somebody's season. Are they capable of beating Georgia? They're capable, mainly because Kentucky's defense is still the strength of their team, obviously, and Georgia's offense is the weakness of their team. But who are we going to see trot out at quarterback for Georgia this week, Mark? I mean, I at this point you could get a hat and just throw a bunch of names in there and shake the hat up and pull one out, and you might be right.
Didn't Kirby say after the game or sometime after maybe not directly after the game, but in the next week's news conference, that Stetson Bennett was the guy?
Yeah, I don't know. Nothing would surprise me that he would say that. I just don't understand. If JT Daniels is cleared medically to play, why he's not starting? I mean, what do you have to lose? There's no way he's going to be worse than Stetson Bennett, right? I mean, it's a very tiny chance that he would be worse than Stetson Bennett. But the upside with a JT Daniels over Stetson Bennett is worth all the risk in the world, as far as I'm concerned. You got to see what you got. You brought him in for a reason.
If you're Georgia, and I'm not going to go, I guess they're playing 10 games instead of 12. I was going to say 9-3. You're so good everywhere else. You can only be so bad. And if you're not going to win a championship and take that shot with the best talent that you've got in the room, meaning JT Daniels, what's it matter if you lose one extra game because JT Daniels throws 5 interceptions and you go 8-2 instead of 9-1, and you could have played for a champ? They're in a position where they got to win the rest of their games, unless they got to win the rest of their games to get a rematch with Alabama. And go with the upside, go with the ceiling. We talked about the 2018 decision that Dabo made. We talked about that last week, where he could have ridden Kelly Bryant to the ACC championship, probably got his 4th seed as a playoff team, and lost. Played it safe, but he went with a freshman, went with Trevor Lawrence, and we saw how that turned out.
I mean, and this isn't even necessarily, I mean, we do have film on JT Daniels. We do know what he is. I mean, yes, it was a long time ago. Yes, it was at another school, but we still know at least somewhat what you're going to get from him. I think you've got to play him. And Mike 3883 here says Georgia is doing it intentionally to keep other teams on their toes. I'm assuming what he's saying is not announcing who they're going to play at quarterback is, they're playing a chess game here. Maybe that is true. Maybe it isn't. But at the end of the day, if JT Daniels does not trot out there to start against Kentucky, as a Georgia fan, you have to have serious concerns about what's going on with the offensive coordinator and of course, with Kirby Smart, what they're thinking.
JT's got 1 full season at USC. He did not have the support around him that he needed. He had great receivers, but no blocking, no defense. They lost 7 games. It wasn't his fault for the most part. He was only a freshman, and he played a full season. Then he played the first game to 2 games. I think he got hurt in the second game the next season, and then he was done. And what he's got on tape, what he's got on all these box scores is capable play. He didn't light it up, but he wasn't a disaster. He was good, and he's obviously very talented.
Luke Walker says, hate to break it to you, but JT Daniels isn't very good. Well, I mean, how will we know that? We don't really know that yet.
Yeah, I'd like to see him with his Georgia personnel around him and see how good he is.
Right. Anyway, Georgia opens up as a 14.5-point favorite over Kentucky. I believe that's about right. Let's face it, they could trot me out there at quarterback. Georgia's defense is just too good. Kentucky has no offense at all. Yep. So I don't. Even if Georgia only scores 14 points in this game, they probably still win, because I don't think Kentucky was scoring more than 7 unless they get a defensive touchdown or something like that. Wisconsin and Nebraska, I think we talked a little bit about that already. The game I'm most interested that probably isn't on a lot of people's radar, unless you're just a huge college football fan, or certainly if you're keeping your eye on the SEC. Obviously, one of the Cinderella stories this year is Arkansas not being at the bottom of the barrel, but looking halfway decent and competing against high-level teams like Georgia week 1. But they're going up against an A&M team who only has 1 loss. I think this is an interesting matchup, Mark. And A&M is still in the hunt. I mean, they've got their head-to-head loss with Alabama, but outside of Alabama, A&M can beat everybody in the West this year, I think. So they're still in the hunt, basically, is what I'm trying to say. It's a long shot, but in the hunt. So is Arkansas a team that can upset A&M's season, or can we see A&M come out there and prove that they're getting better each week, which I think that they are?
Yeah, the West has turned into going from Alabama, Of course, it was LSU last year, and just this gauntlet of teams that are top 10, 15 teams, Auburn, LSU, maybe Texas A&M, to this, like, well, let's figure out everybody else. Everybody else seems pretty even. Like Arkansas can go beat LSU now. That wouldn't surprise anybody. Whereas that was a joke a month ago. And it just seems to be this hodgepodge. But the one team that's somewhat differentiated itself is Texas A&M with a win against Florida. They beat Mississippi State handily, and they're loaded with talent. I love Isaiah Spiller. I think he's a tremendous back. Kellen Mond is hit or miss. He's got the talent, the speed, the arm. Just don't make mistakes. And they lost to Alabama by 4 touchdowns, but maybe everybody does in the SEC. And that would be fascinating if, and now again, the Auburn game and the LSU games, those aren't the type of games this year that they usually are. Not that they couldn't lose those games, but yeah, there's the possibility, and it's fairly high, that they go 9-1 and they had the big loss to Bama. Now it would be more interesting if they would have only lost by 1 score to Bama.
Yeah.
And be sitting there as a non-SEC championship game team with this great record. That what do you do with them?
Right. Yeah, you're right. The score the score in that one could come back to bite A&M in a playoff. Yeah, that's what you're talking about, a playoff conversation, right?
I am.
Yeah. And we've seen it happen before. We've seen non-division champ, right? Alabama didn't even win their division a couple of years ago. Got into the playoffs, won the national championship, didn't they?
Yeah.
In the year they played Georgia and beat them. Yeah. So yeah, we've seen it before.
Alabama.
And I think of all years, this is a year that something like that could happen a lot easier than maybe another year, because obviously the conference only scheduling and the short season and the whole 9 yards. So it is interesting.
Yeah. If Cincinnati's undefeated and the winner of the Big 12 has 1 loss, and A&M sitting there with an SEC schedule and they're 9-1, and Oklahoma State's 9-1, and Cincinnati's 9-0, or however many games they play.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be, and a lot of those scenarios I think are very possible that you're saying. It's going to be very interesting. There's going to be 2 or 3 teams probably that are very, very upset for getting left out of the playoffs this year, but that's pretty much par for the course. When you only have 4 teams, there's going to be at least 2 teams that are feeling like they're getting snubbed on the deal. Last but not least here, Missouri and Florida. So Florida, we know, as they haven't played for 2 weeks now because of coronavirus issues. Missouri is a surprising team, a lot like Arkansas, I would say. This quarterback from Missouri is playing lights out. I thought Missouri was going to be the worst team in the SEC. I thought they were going to be even worse than Vanderbilt and Arkansas before the season started. Well, we've already seen that this isn't true. This could be an elimination game for Florida. This is a huge game for Florida. And again, Missouri looks plenty capable of possibly pulling an upset. Do I think they're going to? No, I'm not saying that. But this could easily be, if Florida drops this game, I think their season's over. So this is huge.
There are double-digit upsets almost every week in college football, and there's usually 1, 2, or 3. Missouri's playing good football. They beat LSU. They took care of Kentucky last week, and I know Kentucky's not great, but they're an SEC team that's a mid-tier team.
And they beat them convincingly, too. It wasn't a close game, really.
Yeah. Missouri hit the one bad game against, they lost to Alabama like everybody else is, and they lost to Tennessee. And that's when, at the point in which I thought, okay, Missouri's about what I thought they were, just like you. I didn't think they were the worst team, but I thought they were in that mix as the worst team.
I thought after losing Kelly Bryant, who's not great, but a good quarterback, and then of losing their defensive or their head coach, rather, who's now the defensive coordinator, ironically, right, at Arkansas.
Yeah.
I thought that was the reason they were going to fall off, but they're not. They're better than they were last year. So maybe they made the right move by getting rid of the coach there. Obviously, they did.
Yeah, they're an interesting team, and this is not a gimme. This is not with the way Florida's playing defense. If you put together the way Missouri's throwing the ball and the way Florida's playing defense and haven't been able to fix it.
Yeah, right. And plus, what are the lingering effects of having 2 weeks off, the coronavirus, the whole thing? This is a game to keep an eye on. Now, it wouldn't shock me also if Florida went out there and scored 50 points and won by 3 touchdowns. I mean, Florida's offense is clearly one of the top 5 in the country. I think we can all agree on that. But the defense has been so bad that this could be a shootout, and it's one to keep an eye on. All right, Mark, I think we're running out of time here. Thank you all for joining us. You're all amazing. Thank you for everybody that donated. Again, Mark and I really appreciate it. If it weren't for the donations to the channel, we could not do the show. And we want to continue to do the show. So thank you. Mark, other than here, every Monday at noon, where else can the fine people on YouTube find you?
Just search Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Just go with Mark Rogers TV in your YouTube search. Find us over there. We got previews, predictions, all the typical stuff, and call-in shows on throughout the week. If you're locked into any particular teams, we got Florida State, Ohio State, and Miami live streams each and every week. We do an SEC show now on Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern time. And we're throwing in another one, Nebraska, starting our Nebraska live. And there's a reason for that. People are like, you went to Nebraska? That was the next one you chose? There is a reason.
There's always a reason.
We had somebody come forward and say, we're gonna pay you to do a Nebraska live show. I said, sure, I'll do a Nebraska live show. I've got no Nebraska guests, contributors. I guess I got to go find some, or I got to make sure I watch the Nebraska game every week.
I'm sure you could probably find some. You have a new SEC show, right? When is that one? I saw that one last week. That was a first-time show for that one, wasn't it?
Yeah, so basically at 8 o'clock Eastern time on Wednesday night, we throw it open to all our SEC guest contributors, beat writers, and filter in as many as we can get to within an hour and a half or so, and get to as many games as possible.
Great. Mark, you are one of the hardest working people in the business. There's no doubt about that. That's why they call you. You know what? On a last note here, on a not so serious note, I don't know how much you watch of Colin Cowherd. I don't really watch the show because it's just on at a bad time for me, but I do watch the clips on YouTube each week where he has Joel Klatt on once a week. Do you know, have you heard this? He introduces Joel Klatt before every show now as the voice of college football. Did you know that? It makes me angry when I see it because you're the voice of college football. They stole it from you.
They did. The story on that, real quick, somebody was commenting to my channel maybe 3 years ago, something in that range. Maybe I've lost track of time. Could be longer than that. Somebody comments to the channel and they had a question, they had a legitimate comment, and they didn't even say, Mark, you're the voice of college football. They like matter-of-factly put that in the comment. Mark, as basically the voice of college football, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? And I thought, and I read that to one of my friends, and he goes, man, you got to run with that. That guy just calls you the voice of college football. And he didn't even state it like, I'm going to call you the voice of college football. He said it kind of like, well, everybody knows you're the voice of college football. Da, 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 da. And he asked this question. So I ran with it.
Well, they've stolen it from you now. And they're claiming it as their own. And that upsets me massively. I'm thinking about writing a strongly worded letter to the producers of the Colin Cowherd show on your behalf. All right, guys. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again. Same time, same bat channel, Monday at noon right here for college football coast to coast. Everybody have a great day. See you next time.